Hi everyone, my name is Michael Boothroyd and I am the Director of Admissions here at campus. And today I'm spending some time with the Director of our Financial Aid Office, Stephanie, to go over a lot of different information that can be really important to students who are starting the financial aid process and trying to navigate all of that. So before we kick everything off here, maybe you could just introduce yourself, talk about your background, the different types of schools you've worked at, anything that you can help us understand your perspective on where you're coming from.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Zeppenfelt. I'm the financial aid specialist here at campus. I help students navigate the financial aid process and assist them with applying for financial aid and fulfilling their financial aid requirements to ensure that they can enroll in our program. I started in financial aid at a small four-year private institution called the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, PA. It's a school that's focused on the arts, design and performing. And there I counseled students. I served as the office assistant and then was promoted to a counselor position. And I handled all the financial aid matters for my cohort of students, as well as any kind of billing issues and helping students make payments. And then from there, I worked for the Community College of Philadelphia for 8 years. Again, my main role was assisting students to navigate through the process. I'm very familiar with the unique needs of community college students. I've seen pretty much everything there. In addition, I also managed the college's electronic forms for the financial aid office and making sure they were compliant with the federal regulations and assisting students with completing them online. And then in addition to my work experience, I've been a member and active in FAFSA, which is the Pennsylvania Association for Student Financial Aid Administrators. I served on executive council for over 3 years. For about 1 to 2 years, I served as the organization's treasurer and managed the entire financial portfolio.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. That's a long time working with students. And now, for a lot of students, this is probably their first time encountering such a large financial process. Is that what you would think?
Absolutely. I mean, many times it's the first time students are hearing your typical financial terms, especially when it, involves possibly loans and accepting debt and things of that nature. A lot of times parents are unfamiliar with these terms as well. So students should never feel bad about having questions because as a financial aid administrator, you don't expect the students to know what's going on or how to do it. That's why we're here to assist. That's why I have a job. I always tell students, don't worry about asking questions. That's why I'm here. So it definitely is the first time a lot of students are encountering, maybe even applying for federal benefits, things like that, and filling out federal forms and submitting tax documents. And a lot of times they don't really know what we're asking for. But again, just never hesitate to ask questions. It's nothing I have not heard before.
Let's talk a little bit about that, or continue to talk about that, which is the relationship between students and financial aid.
Sure. So basically, I always like to break it down to students in an easier to understand way. So what's a lot of times what students don't understand is they're applying for funds within a federal program that the school participates in. Not all students can receive financial aid. The school has to participate in the program and follow the rules set by the government. So students, a lot of times I think, view the financial aid office as trying to keep them from getting financial aid when that's not the case. We are here to assist you in navigating the process, jumping through the hoops and doing what you have to do to receive the federal funds. But just keep in mind, this is money coming from the government. There are going to be requirements that you need to fulfill, whether it's completing specific applications like the FAFSA. Some schools require additional applications depending on what kind of financial aid is available at specific schools.
Stephanie, let me ask you this. Maybe you can talk a little bit about loan versus grants.
So it's somewhat in the name. If you're receiving a loan, you're being lent money, and that money has to be paid back once you're no longer enrolled, taking at least 6 credits per term. And then that would also trigger the interest. So you would have to make your payments with interest. And then the grants are aid that does not have to be paid back. So you're being granted money. Students qualify for that, usually from the FAFSA. For the federal grants, some schools have their own grants and their own terms to qualify for that. So I can't speak for every school, but most use the FAFSA to determine grant eligibility for their institutional grants as well.
And you were saying there's a lot of rules involved, obviously, and people shouldn't be afraid to ask questions. What is a financial aid officer trying to do on behalf of a student?
Sure. So when a student completes the FAFSA, it goes to the Department of Education for processing, and it gets checked against different federal agencies. And then based on that, they'll comment on the FAFSA, and then the FAFSA is received by the school. So that's how the school knows what to request and what to ask for. So document requests could be anything from completing worksheets, providing tax information, financial information, maybe benefits received, statements, things of that nature. It could even be requests for previous academic transcripts, citizenship documentation. These are all common documents that are requested. So it's really good to keep your documents, file them or scan them in a place so that it's not difficult to find or you're not caught off guard when the requests are made.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, you're saying students will fill out their FAFSA form, go through that process, but then after that it's been done, the school may need to require additional documents to supplement that for a variety of different reasons. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. So I always tell students the FAFSA is the starting point, it's not the ending point. So you want to get that done as soon as possible or as early as possible. A lot of times students ask, when do things have to be done by? And I ask for them to try and change your mentality of, when can I do this? So the FAFSA opens every year on October 1st, the year prior. So you can start applying for your financial aid during the start of the school year. So you would apply for next year's financial aid at the beginning of your current school year.
Great. Sometimes students will express how frustrated they can get with the process. As you're saying, it's the first time they've done a lot of that. What advice can you give to a frustrated student about how to kind of navigate all this?
Absolutely. First, don't hesitate to ask for help. Also, start the process early because ultimately everybody needs help the sooner it gets to classes starting, and then you're kind of fighting for attention. So I recommend reaching out as soon as possible. Sometimes it's too early, and if that's the case, the financial aid office will let you know. But ultimately, once you're admitted at an institution, you can start working with that financial aid office, and they will let you know what they need from you, when it's available, how to access it, and submit those requests.
So now that we've talked a little bit about the student experience and what it's like for them to go through that and all the ins and outs and the variety of documents, maybe we can just talk about some basic understandings of financial aid, or financial aid 101.
Absolutely. So financial aid is an umbrella term. A lot of students get confused with that term because they think financial aid is just the money that you don't have to pay back, but loans fall under the term financial aid as well. So if you ask the financial aid office if you're going to be eligible for financial aid, they're going to say yes, but it might be loans, it might not be grants. So keep in mind, financial aid is loans, grants, scholarships. It's federal work study if you are awarded that from your school. So those are all different types of financial aid that fall under that umbrella, and some is paid directly to the school, some comes to the student has to take it to the school. Federal work study is a paycheck for a student working on campus or at their college. So it really varies, and do not hesitate to contact your financial aid office for help and clarification on what everything means on your award letter.
Maybe you can, the one I hear about a lot of the time, and I think a lot of people hear about, is Pell Grant. Maybe you can just tell us a little specifics about what the Pell Grant is.
Sure, the Pell Grant is a need-based grant. Students are eligible for it by completing the FAFSA. So the FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Federal aid comes from Washington, D.C. So the Pell Grant is a federal need-based grant. Students are eligible for that as long as they meet the requirements based on the FAFSA information. There isn't a deadline to apply. If they meet the financial criteria, then they are eligible for the Pell Grant.
And how many years can you get Pell Grants for?
Students are eligible for Pell Grant as long as they maintain the financial eligibility every year. They can receive it for up to 6 years of full-time study. So if a student is attending at a part-time status, they would have eligibility past 6 years.
It's a term I've heard sometimes, and maybe you can give more detail on it, which is a scholarship displacement. What does that mean?
Scholarship displacement you'll find more at private institutions that also award their own institutional financial aid. So what happens with scholarship displacement is there's rules to how much financial aid students can receive at a school, and that's determined by multiple factors, and a lot of that has to do with how expensive that school is. So more expensive schools have higher cost of attendance, but cost of attendance also incorporates unbilled expenses that a student may encounter, like transportation, living expenses, things of that nature, anything that kind of results as an expense because you're going to college. So basically, if a student receives more, say, outside scholarships, and they bring that in, sometimes the school may reduce an institutional scholarship, or they might. Different schools have different policies, so you would always want to check with the financial aid office about their policy with scholarship displacement. But if it gets to a point where you're over awarded, they might have to reduce their own institutional scholarships so that you're not over awarded for financial aid. And that's very technical with financial aid. It's hard to really give a sweeping answer about that because it's very specific to each individual school. So I just recommend to students, especially students who know they're receiving outside scholarships or scholarships from other areas, to contact their financial aid office and check on the school's policies, and if, is there any chance that the financial aid received from the school is going to change in the 4 years, because sometimes that can happen as well. Students could be awarded a large package for the first year and then it changes the following years.
Great. Obviously, loans are a big topic of conversation, a big consideration for students. Can you walk us through the different types of loans and what those are and let's start with that. What are the different types of loans?
Absolutely. So for undergraduate students, there are the federal direct loans. There's two types that fall under that category. There's the subsidized and unsubsidized federal direct loans. The federal direct loans are capped. There's limits to how much students can receive per year and for their overall aggregate loan amount, meaning over the course of earning your undergraduate degree, how much total loans you can have. So there are limits to the federal loans. So the difference between the subsidized and the unsubsidized loan falls into the interest situation. So ultimately, for the subsidized loan, the interest does not accrue while the student's in school, taking at least 6 credits per term. But the unsubsidized loan, the interest starts accruing from the origination of the loan. So once that loan is created, that loan starts accruing interest that the student is responsible to pay back. So that loan is getting bigger while the student's in school, whereas the subsidized loan is not getting bigger. In addition to the federal direct loans, there's a federal Parent Plus loan that dependent students' parents can apply for. That's based on credit. So ultimately, if the parent is approved, they can borrow the amount that's needed for the student, or if they're denied, then the student's unsubsidized loan can be increased. So sometimes students have their parents apply for that as a strategy to increase their own loans. There aren't limits to the Parent Plus loan. The limits just apply to the federal direct loans that are in the student's name. And that there's a few variables that kind of determine how much your loan will be per year. It's pretty much your independent dependent status, and then also the amount of credits that you've earned, your total credits earned. So once you reach a sophomore status, which would be 30 credits, 30 to 59 credits, you would get a bump in your subsidized loan. And then the same when you reach 60 credits, you get another bump. So it's important to complete the courses that you attempt. Those credits affect a lot of different areas.
And then finally, the one I know a lot of people talk about, and I got when I was in college, is a work-study benefit. Maybe you can explain to us how that all operates and how people qualify and what that means.
Sure. A lot of schools have federal work-study and non-federal work-study positions. So ultimately, both are jobs for the school, whether it's on campus or for an online program working remotely for the school. If you have federal work-study allocations, the money that's coming to pay you comes from the federal government. If it's a non-federal work-study position, the money coming to pay your paycheck comes from the school. The school's budget is being used to pay you. So that's the difference between the two. Non-federal work-study is not counted as financial aid.
And for the non-federal, do you still have to qualify? Do a lot of universities look at FAFSA to determine who on campus can get that, or is that open to more students?
That's open to more students. I can't really say because, again, it's very specific to the school's policies, but most times it more so kind of depends on the department that is doing the hiring, what their budget is like. Some departments have smaller budgets than others. They might be the ones that are looking for federal work-study students versus non-federal. So that can play a part sometimes, but if the school states that, they have budget for non-federal work-study students, then they can basically hire whomever they would like.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about all sorts of like federal plans and government plans and things like that. Are there any other sources of aid that students should look for or consider when they're trying to figure out how to pay for school?
So as far as government aid goes, the federal aid from the FAFSA will include the Pell Grant if a student qualifies and the federal direct loans. There might be federal awards for specific type of programs as well, but that would again be very specific to that school and program. Students should always complete the FAFSA early because some schools have deadlines as far as their priority deadline, because some awards are first come, first serve. Some students might be awarded an SEOG grant, which is another federal grant, but how that's allocated that's up to the school, because essentially the government gives the school a pot of money and they can administer it as they see that the way they feel best helps their students. So again, that's another reason why applying early is imperative, because you could be missing out on aid that you would have been eligible for but had already been awarded to other students. On top of that, state aid, if you are in a state that has state grants, a lot of times they use the FAFSA information to determine your eligibility. That's why on the FAFSA 2, it asks you what your state of residence is. Have you been a resident of that state for 5 years? That's why they're asking those questions, because that information gets sent to your state's higher education agency. In addition to that, there are scholarship options, that you would have to look for from different sources, high schools, your employer, maybe your parents' employer, if your parents a member of a union or you are, or professional associations. These are all places that tend to have scholarship options for their members. So I always advise students to think about your community and what you're affiliated with, and check with those agencies and organizations to see if there's any scholarship opportunities there, any religious organizations as well, churches. They all have options sometimes, so it doesn't hurt to ask. There's also scholarship search engines out there. I just caution students to be wary of scams. Unfortunately, those do exist out there. And if you ever find a scholarship you're interested in applying for, I would recommend contacting the financial aid office if you're unsure if it's a legit opportunity. They can help you kind of decipher that. Students can also, I encourage them to, let their extended family and friends, mentors know of their educational goals, because a lot of times those folks want to assist and help in any way that they can. So sometimes they can assist with tuition payments if possible, outside scholarships as well. It's really important to start this process early, and at least, I would say, at least a year ahead of time. A lot of outside scholarships deadlines fall within the January to March range. So by the time by the time you get the bill from your school that you're intending to attend, it could be too late, essentially, to find additional money. You need to do the work to do that before you even essentially know where you're going to attend. So fastweb.com is a legit scholarship search engine. You create a profile and it'll let you know what kind of scholarships are out there. But just don't wait until you don't have any money or are stressed about how you're going to pay. Once it gets to that point, it's crunch time. You need to have your bill squared away, and there isn't really time to find additional funds at that point.
How do students start? How do they start applying for financial aid?
Federal financial aid is applied for by completing the FAFSA. That's done at FAFSA.gov. Students will log in to complete it there. They will also need to create what's called an FSA ID, which is their username and password to access their financial aid portal, but also electronically sign their FAFSA. If the student is under the age of 24 and most likely needs to provide parent information as well, the parent also needs to create an FSA ID so that they can electronically sign the FAFSA as well. That really expedites the process. If the signatures are missing, the FAFSA will reject, and it can slow things down. The CSS profile is used by certain schools, primarily schools that award institutional financial aid based on need. So the CSS profile is much more in depth. It asks a lot more questions. Not all schools use it or require it, but be aware that many do. And if they do, you have to complete it. So just always, there's no harm in reaching out to the financial aid office to get your checklist of what you need to do. A lot of information is always available on the school's financial aid website as well. So definitely check that out.
I know sometimes students can appeal a grant or a decision or something like that. Can you talk about what constitutes an appeal, what that process is like, how students should look at that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's different kinds of appeals. This sounds like the unusual circumstances appeal. That's basic. Students use that appeal when their FAFSA information doesn't reflect the current family situation. So the FAFSA uses financial information from 2 years prior. A lot can change in 2 years. The student or the parent could, become unemployed. Unfortunately, there could be deaths in the family of a provider of some sort, parent separation, or if a student separates from their spouse. And it doesn't have to be a legal separation, but they would have to provide documentation of the separate addresses. So ultimately, if there's any situation where your FAFSA information, like your FAFSA from the year in question, that financial information is not current, you want to reach out to the financial aid office, explain the situation, and inquire how to submit an appeal for reconsideration.
So let's assume a student's got their financial aid, they've started school. What do they have to do to maintain that eligibility, and what is SAP?
Sure. So SAP stands for Satisfactory Academic Progress. It's the academic requirements students need to maintain in order to keep their eligibility to keep receiving financial aid. So the federal requirements for that are you have to maintain at least a 2.0 GPA overall. You have to earn 67% of the credits that you attempt. So if you fail or withdraw from classes, that hurts your completion rate because you attempted credits that you didn't earn. And then the final one is you have to complete your program before attempting a certain amount of credits. So that is determined by the length of the program. So for campus, our program is 92 credits. So students have to complete the program before attempting 138 credits.
So eventually, once you get into school, your ability to be determined to finish school actually can impact your financial aid.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's many in many areas, students' academic performance and their registration affects their financial aid. So whenever there's any kind of changes on the academic side, students most definitely should make an appointment and talk to a financial aid advisor as well to make sure that what they need academically is not going to impact them financially. Over my experience, I've run into some times when students receive the best academic information from maybe their academic advisors, but that conflicts with the financial aid side of things, and it could end up having the student owe money they weren't anticipating. So before you find yourself in that situation, it's best to talk to the academic advisors because they're the ones that know the academic side the best. Talk to the financial aid advisors, they know the financial implications the best, and then take both that information to determine what's best for you.
Great. Thank you for that. It's really important for students to understand that. Because if an advisor says, oh, maybe you should withdraw from this class and start over next semester or next quarter, that may have impact on their financial aid. And so they need to understand that before they make that final decision.
Absolutely. And some schools also have rules about repeating courses and how many times you can repeat a course and receive financial aid for it and things like that. Again, there's the overarching federal rules, but a lot of schools have their own policies and procedures as well. So you definitely don't want to be a stranger. You want to find the people on campus or at your school that can help you and keep their contact information so that you know who to contact in the future as well for if additional questions.
So let's talk about how to help students navigate this and be as effective as they can. What are some common mistakes or misconceptions that students have when they're starting this process or any time during their process? What are their misconceptions?
The big one is that the financial aid office doesn't want to help you get financial aid. I would say that's a big misconception from students. We are there to help you, but we also have to make sure we're following the rules of the program. Otherwise, that puts the whole institution, all students receiving financial aid, at risk if we're not following the rules set by the government. Ultimately, on the FAFSA, you want to just make sure that you're including all eligible family members in your household. So if you're a dependent student, that would include your parents, that would include any siblings under the age of 24 that your parents financially support. You want to make sure you don't answer the question asking if you have a bachelor's degree prior to the school year that is in question on the FAFSA. If you say yes to that question, that's going to make you ineligible for a Pell Grant, because students can only receive a Pell Grant for their undergraduate studies and for your first bachelor's degree. If you transfer to many schools, that can cause problems down the line too. So I recommend students to not enroll in a school and start classes unless it feels right, if it's really something that you want to do, because receiving financial aid from multiple schools in a short time period can trigger a review that needs to occur, and it's a lot of paperwork. It does, and transferring doesn't necessarily reset your financial aid either, because you have an overall amount that you're eligible for. So whatever you've used at a different school, that's counted against your overall pot, essentially. So there is a limit to how much financial aid students can receive total for their undergraduate career. It doesn't matter if it was at different schools or not. The government keeps track of what you earn, what you received, and what school you used it at.
Let's talk a little bit about, a lot of schools have, most schools have a registration period where you can add classes or drop classes. How does that impact any sort of financial aid or tuition decisions?
Sure. So you definitely want to understand your school's policies regarding add drop. Some schools have an add drop period, some do not. So usually if you alter your registration during the add drop period, it's fine. There's no penalty for that. And based on your credit amount, that's going to determine your financial aid amount. So if you started at 12 credits but then decide I'm only going to take 9, that will affect your financial aid amounts. Now, if you drop classes after the add drop period, so basically once you're past the add drop period, you are charged for the classes that you're enrolled in. But if you drop before your financial aid pays out to those classes, you're not going to receive financial aid for classes that don't exist anymore. So that's another area that students may not be aware of that can cause them to have a bill, essentially. Also, if you withdraw from all of your classes before the 60% mark of the semester, you will end up owing money because the school is required to send some of your financial aid back to the government. If you drop all your classes after the 60% mark, your bill will stay the same. You can keep the financial aid. However, the financial aid used is counted against your overall allocation from the government, and thus you used money and didn't earn any credits. So you definitely don't want to make that a habit. Otherwise, you're going to get caught up with SAP, or just end up owing money due to schools having to return the funds back to the government.
And then defaulting loans. Obviously, people don't want to do it, but how does having a defaulted loan in your history affect what happens with financial aid?
Sure. So that's something you definitely want to get resolved, because it's not good to have bill collectors calling you, but it's also going to hurt your credit if you default on student loans. So ultimately, when you have a defaulted student loan, meaning you didn't make the payments when you were supposed to, you're not going to be eligible for any financial aid moving forward until that default is resolved. So for students in that situation, they have to resolve that issue and receive confirmation from their loan servicer or the collections office of the Department of Ed and then provide that documentation to the financial aid office showing that they resolved it, and then the financial aid office can move forward with packaging their financial aid. But I always explain it to students this way. Basically, if you lent somebody money and they said that they would pay you back and they didn't, would you give them more money? Most people would say no. So that's where the government's coming from in that situation. You said you were going to pay this back, you didn't. We're not going to give you anything else moving forward until you fix this up.
Great. So, in conclusion, and as we begin to wrap this up, what is your goals when you think about this? What are your goals as a financial advisor for students?
So my personal goals is I like for students to understand that it's a program. The financial aid officers are not trying to be mean or difficult, but we're just following rules set by Congress that developed this program. So ultimately, the only way to make changes to this program is to contact your federal representatives and let them know how it doesn't work for you. And what needs to change, because ultimately I can't make those changes. I can only follow the rules. And right now, Congress is really looking into these types of issues. So, students should write to your representatives, and let them know what you don't like about it. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of financial aid organizations and things like that reach out to politicians, but they want to hear it from the students. And I don't think students know the power that they have essentially with initiating change. So ultimately, just knowing the connection between the political atmosphere and federal programs, that's where they come from, and that's who can change it. And just know the financial aid officer wants to help you, and they know that some students have to submit a whole lot of documents, and it's frustrating and it's annoying, but unfortunately we have to request those documents.
Great. So let's talk about campus a little bit. Tell me about how you see your role at campus. What are your goals with students specifically at campus?
Sure. So at campus, I do my best for students just to understand the process, understand the whys behind everything. I just find when students know why they have to do things, they're more inclined to do them. It doesn't just feel like obstacles for no reason. I also take it as an opportunity to teach students about money, essentially, about how, and about federal programs. Ultimately, you're applying for a good amount of money and you're going to receive it pretty quickly. I mean, even if you have to provide some documentation, you're going to get a large lump sum of money, probably the quickest way you'll ever get it, even if you had to wait like 2 weeks to get a document or something. I always want to know what student situations are too. I like to know about my students, understand where they're coming from. And, I know the FAFSA isn't always reflective of what a student situation is. So I like when students are able to disclose that information to me. I'm not trying to be nosy or pry or anything like that, but ultimately, in order to help you, I need to know what's going on. Especially when younger students don't have the best relationship with their parents and they can't provide the parent information. So talking about that and determining if they can appeal for an independent status. So that's another thing. If you don't have a great relationship with your parents and don't have their information, you should contact the financial aid office to talk to an advisor there to determine if you can qualify for a dependency override as well. So we do have a lot of students with those types of situations, and then I find how to process them, what the best course of action would be for them, because sometimes they do qualify for an independent status based on their past experiences and situations.
So I know we talked a lot about loans, and obviously that's important to a lot of students, but at campus, that's not as important. Is that correct?
Right, as of October 2022, every student that is enrolled in the campus program does not have a single student loan. We're committed to offering affordable education. We find ways for students to, meet the tuition demands in other ways other than taking out debt to do so. So if students are eligible for the full Pell Grant, that will cover the cost of tuition. And then if students are not eligible for the Pell Grant, we work with students to come up with alternative payment options or work out an affordable payment plan that is manageable for them. But in addition, campus does not have additional hidden fees like a lot of schools do as well, because we provide the technology and the equipment that students need to access their classes, like the computer and internet if needed. And then all of our course materials and texts are open and available online. There's no additional costs with that. You don't have additional costs due to commuting to a physical campus. So we've really found ways to reduce costs and make sure our students are not going into debt to enroll in our program.
So some students may have loans previously coming to campus, but you're saying for campus, there'll be no loans taken out to go to the program. They'll graduate from debt-free from campus, for campus.
Right, from our program. If students had attended a prior program from a different school, they may have student loans from that, but to enroll in the campus program, students have not taken on any additional debt. And
if students are talking to us about campus and working through there, at what point can they reach out to you, and how do they schedule that?
Typically, I start working with students after they've applied and are admitted to the campus program, but I understand too, sometimes students have questions about completing the FAFSA before they're technically admitted. So students can reach out to me at any time for assistance or with questions. They can schedule appointments with me using my Calendly link or calling the office at 312-741-1416. I'd be happy to assist and answer any questions that any students or prospective students might have.
Great. Now, in case students have more questions, I can't imagine they would. You've covered so much information here. Where else should students go to find out more information?
So to learn more about campus, they can definitely email us at admissions@campus.org or financialaid@campus.org. The Federal Student Aid website is a great resource because that's where you're going to be applying for financial aid and completing the FAFSA. You can also monitor the financial aid that you've received at previous schools or, as you move through the campus program. And that website is www.studentaid.gov, and you just log in with your FSA ID.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. This has been really great. You've covered so much information. This is a wealth of knowledge to help students find ways to navigate the FAFSA process. It's been really great. All your experience is really evident by the amount of detail that you can provide students, and it's great to know that you're here to help students make their way. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'm happy to.